Cool. So there was one topic I was thinking about talking about tonight. And that's about the a modular theory of how the mind works.
Okay.
And this comes from pretty much directly from Robert Wright in that book I've talked about a few times, Why Buddhism is True.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really fascinating kind of look at one theory about how the mind operates and how thoughts come into our mind. And so the basis of the theory is that the brain is kind of like a very sophisticated computer, and it and kind of different modules of thought patterns cycle through our conscious awareness. They kind of so in the kind of in the background there's different modules running of thoughts, and then depending on the emotions attached to them and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, certain emotions get triggered, and then the whatever modules are attached to those emotions, those are that's the module that then bubbles up into our conscious awareness. So if you kind of think about it, one example he gave, or some of the he talked about some of the studies that they did to that support this theory. And so, well, the idea, so generally the modules can be broken up into different kinds of categories of thoughts that often go together. And there's different theories about what the exact number of modules or how exactly they're defined. And it's not, I mean, it's not exactly like a computer program where there's distinct programs that run. It's all, I mean, our minds are all very interwoven, and the modules are interdependent, and some are subsets of others, and some share some thoughts. So some of the examples are there's a self-preservation module. So whenever we feel fear, like the instincts and thoughts that pop up about protecting ourselves, protecting our physical well-being, protecting the well-being of our loved ones. And then also some other big ones are a food acquisition module. So that's pretty important for us. And that's kind of a subset of the broader resource acquisition module. And so those share a lot of kind of thought patterns. Then another commonly discussed module is the mate acquisition module. So whenever we're feeling kind of lonely or romantic, that triggered, or when we're around people that we find attractive, that kind of triggers the mate acquisition module. And so there's various, like I said, depending on how you want to break it up, there's anywhere from like 7 to 20 different modules, depending on who you ask. But it's an interesting way to think about how the mind works. And so one example he gave about some of the research supporting this is he talked about a study or an experiment where they had men sitting in a room filling out questionnaires about their long-term career goals. And they found that if there was also women present in the room, most of the men, their career goals tended, or the career goals that they wrote down tended to be more materialistic in nature. So more about accumulating wealth, accumulating possessions, houses, and things like that. So the idea is that in the presence of women, that mate acquisition module
Mm.
is triggered, and that makes guys think about things like money and resources, because those are things back in our evolutionary days, those are the things that are necessary, or those are the things that make men more attractive in the eyes of a potential mate, right? Having access to lots of resources. And so yeah, that's one example. And kind of the idea is whenever our minds are wandering, that's just kind of when there's not something directly occupying our attention, then these different modules just kind of float up into our awareness. And then if there's not any strong emotion attached to them, then they kind of get pushed out as something else comes up. And um, and so that's the way kind of the brain works, or it's kind of was designed by natural selection to work. But then in our modern lives, there's all kinds of ways that our modern behaviors can hijack this system, right? So with the invention of sugar and junk food, that's caused the whole food acquisition module to go haywire sometimes, because back in the day when our ancestors were living on the Serengeti, the only source of something sweet would be fruit. And fruit also has all kinds of vitamins and nutrients and antioxidants. So fruit is really good for us. but it was often in limited supply back when our ancestors were evolving. So we were um, guided by natural selection to develop modules that when we taste something sweet, we're kind of driven to eat as much of it as we can, because if you think about fruit's very seasonal, it's only around for a limited time. So it was evolutionarily beneficial to eat a whole bunch of fruit whenever you found it. But now that we're living in our modern lives where we have things like junk food, that that can play havoc with our lives and our consciousness, because now we have easy access to sugar, and sugar that's wired right into the dopamine system, and so that can cause lots of problems for people, because it gives us this dopamine rush to eat sugar, which was beneficial in our evolutionary history when the only source of sugar was fruit. But now that we have all these empty calories around, this can be a big detriment to us as we try, because we can just get into the habit of wanting that dopamine fix from sugar instead of relying on the naturally evolved modules that guided us towards something sweet because it was healthy for us. So those are just some of the examples of how this theory of mind works, a theory of modules, the modules of the mind, and some of the ways that they get hijacked by our modern lives. So does that make sense? Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Have you heard something like that before, or is that new?
It's new to me, but it makes sense. I think, like, I don't know the source of it, but what I've heard, as long as we're talking about like our mental thought patterns, is that we think anywhere between, is it like 700, is it 70,000 or 700 thoughts a day, 90% of which you thought yesterday,
Oh, yeah.
and that we're just like often rehashing old stuff. And so to kind of just pay attention to the quality of what those thought patterns are. So
Right.
if you are thinking, anyway, and also just that we're just repeating what we already know a lot of the time. So,
Yeah.
so then it seems like, oh, well, maybe I'll try a different route, maybe I'll try a different thing, and I don't know, kind of just break some of my habitual cycles.
Right. And that's where meditation and mindfulness come into play, because sitting in meditation or trying to be mindful throughout the day, we can start to notice how
Mhm.
notice how repetitive the modules are, the thoughts are that keep
Mhm.
popping up into our mind. I've noticed with myself, just kind of being aware of this, I start to notice when my mind is wandering. It's like, oh, yep, that's the food acquisition module that I'm in again,
Mhm.
or there, there's the mate acquisition module coming up.
So does that help to just like name it?
I think so, yeah, for me personally. And I'm going to talk about a meditation technique about that a little
Okay.
bit. And the other way that meditation and mindfulness helps is, since what determines whether or not a module rises up to our conscious awareness, since that's all determined by emotion and the charge, the kind of the emotional charge associated with the module and whatever circumstances are triggering our emotions. So any kind of mindfulness practice that helps us be less immediately reactive to emotions can give us greater control about the how we act on thoughts that pop up in our mind, since at
Mhm.
the root of all our thoughts are emotions. So any practices that help us sit with emotions rather than just automatically reacting to them can help give us more control over our lives and over our conscious minds.
Mhm.
And um, so there's kind of this sense that we think that we're in control of our minds, and we think that we're deciding what we do and what we think all the time. But some of the research shows, and I think anyone who meditates for a while starts to realize that thoughts kind of have a mind of their own sometimes. And they tend to sometimes it can feel like they're actually competing, like trying to grab our attention, right? Or competing with each other to come into our awareness. So if you ever had that sensation where there's one part of you that wants to do something and one part of you wants to do something else, say like the food acquisition module wants you to eat that candy bar, but then your long-term preservation, your self-preservation module knows all about the ill effects of too much candy. And so
Mhm.
that module wants you to not eat the candy bar, but you got this other instant gratification module, food module wanting, telling you just do it now, just get the dopamine. So it helps explain. I don't know if you've ever noticed that in yourself, kind of that competing, when it seems
Mhm.
like there's two parts of yourself competing with each other. And so in a sense that's true. There are these different modules within us that are kind of competing with each other for who's going to win control of our conscious mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, this thinking about it in this way is has helped me have a better understanding of what's going on in my mind.